John chapter 7, starting in verse 53. Then they all went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group, and they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" And they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. And Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." It's the word of the Lord. Well, we are going through John, and we are picking up here where we left off last Sunday. Before that, in June, just going through the Gospel of John from June till now, all those J words. We're going through the Gospel of John, and we're picking up where we left off, and here we are. First Sunday of the year, and this interesting, challenging, uncomfortable text. The whole story is one of high drama and high stakes. A whole lot is going on here. A whole lot is on the line here. There are literal rock throwers here. This is honestly a life and death situation. A woman's life is on the line. And in fact, we'll see it's not just the woman who's on the line. Jesus, deftly but with determination, takes the bait of the religious teachers, meaning he puts himself in harm's way as well. How is Jesus going to handle a life and death situation? That's some of the drama here. So it's a story of high drama. It's a story of high stakes, but it's also, even today, a story that we read with a little bit of rising tension. Because here's a text in which what is at question is how the law of God is going to be applied. How are the commands of God in the Bible going to be applied, and going to be applied to the most personal, sensitive, currently controversial, and potentially explosive of areas, sex and sexuality? And so we're going through the Gospel of John, and here it is. It's just thrust in there. And it is literally thrust in there. That's why I'm pretty confident, whatever Bible you have, there's notes all around or set off this section saying, wait a minute, this doesn't really belong here. And that's true, it doesn't. You could keep reading from 7 verse 52, skip over this section, pick back up at chapter 8 verse 12, and read on, and you could just keep going. It doesn't skip a beat, because almost all scholars and almost all Bibles, at least modern Bibles, will tell you that this section doesn't belong here. It's not in the earliest manuscripts. But it does reflect Jesus. It does fit in with the content and tone of his ministry as it's everywhere else recorded. And the church has recognized it as legitimate for most of our history. And so here it is. Here we have the Lord and the law. And that's what this high-stakes context is all about. The Lord and the law in regard to even this most personal areas of our life. So what are we going to do with this stuff? What role is the law of God to have in our lives, especially when it speaks to areas like sex and sexuality. Aren't these laws harsh and unfair? Isn't what's happening here harsh and unfair? And what does Jesus say? So, here we are, and it isn't boring. And I hope we can hear out what God's Word has to say here tonight. So, 3 ways. This is what I want to say. The question here is about the Lord and the law, how Jesus is going to deal with the law. Then I want to look at this story and see 3 ways you can, and we see them in evidence here, 3 ways you can deal with the law of God when you come upon it in the Bible. 3 ways you can deal with the commands of God, because we all know there are commands of God in the Bible. And this high-stakes story is going to show us 3 ways you can deal with them. There's only one that won't kill you. So let's look. Holy Spirit, help us to listen. So here's the first thing. The first thing you could do when you come upon the law is cut it out. Just cut it out if you don't like it. Now, a quick word about the story. As I said, the story is misplaced but true. If you have questions about that or about the text, there's a lot of fascinating stuff there. I could do a whole sermon about text criticism, and it might even be interesting to you, but it might not. And I think there are bigger issues going on here. If you're interested in text criticism, I would love to talk more with you about it. Come talk to me. I may even give you a book and say, read this and let's talk together, okay? But what we do know, again, is this is a story that doesn't fit here, but does seem to be authentic, and I can show you that it does match with other things Jesus taught in other places. And in this story, in the background here, in the background of the controversy in this whole story is the cut-it-out approach, which was currently widely in play in Palestine. This seems to be true from historical evidence and seems to make sense of this controversy in the background. Let me tell you what I mean. The historical evidence suggests that in first century Palestine, adultery, the crime, the breaking of the law that's in question here, adultery was rather common, but enforcement of penalties for adultery was not. So adultery was happening. As far as I can tell, it's happened in every human culture always. We didn't make it up in modern America. But this thing was happening in first century Palestine, but the penalties were not being enforced. And in fact, this was true even of something as blatant as the leader of the time, Herod. You may remember that Herod took his brother's wife, if you're familiar with these stories in the Gospels. And John the Baptist had the gall to say to Herod, you shouldn't do that. And it was one of the reasons that led to John getting his head cut off. Because people didn't say things like that. That was rude. In the background is a society in which these kinds of things are happening, but people aren't enforcing the law. And if you have a society in which the law of God in the Old Testament, and if you have a society in which a lot of people are engaged in some of these things, but you're not enforcing it, returning to enforcement would poll rather lousily in the general public, right? Let's not go there. And the teachers of the law and the Pharisees know this. That's why they bring this woman to Jesus and put him on the spot in the temple. They knew what was in the law. They knew that no good teacher could come out and say, well, let's just not enforce the law anymore. He couldn't, if he said, well, we shouldn't enforce Moses' law, then he'd get himself in trouble. Who do you think you are, greater than Moses? Indeed, he was. But they thought this will get him in trouble in the one way if he says don't enforce the law. But if he says do enforce the law, stone her, this would get him in trouble with a whole other set of people. And actually, most scholars think that they probably thought that's where he would get in trouble. Jesus had a well-known reputation for hanging out with people who were notorious and who were sinners, and they probably thought he's going to be soft on the law and we're going to get him. They suspected Jesus would be in favor of the cut-it-out approach. And the cut-it-out approach, just ignore what you don't like. Just don't enforce it. Just don't read it. Just don't talk about it. That approach has been popular for a long time. It's still with us today. That approach is in things like the Bible that was used by Thomas Jefferson, our own founding father. I was in a bookstore this week nearby, and I found a copy of the Jefferson Bible. Have you ever heard of the Jefferson Bible? The Jefferson Bible was Thomas Jefferson's copy of the Bible, in which he literally took a razor and cut out all the parts that he didn't like, because he couldn't edit it with a word processing document. He cut out all the parts, then he taped and glued back together what was left and made his own personal copy of the Bible. This is what Thomas Jefferson says the Bible should really say, all the other stuff edited out. Now he did that. You can find a copy of that. And the truth is, it's not just Jefferson, it's not just first century Palestine. We all have parts of the Bible that make the back of our hair stand, the hair on the back of our necks, or if you have some, the hair on the top of your head stand on edge a little bit. And our tendency, one popular approach is say, well, just take the razor and cut it out. So can you do that with the Bible? Did Jesus do that with the Bible? Jesus did not. Jesus does not dismiss the law. In fact, what you see here is Jesus upholding the law. You will search in vain in the Gospels for Jesus taking a razor to any part of God's law and cutting it out. He does not do that. He does not diminish it. In fact, the Pharisees here can't even accuse him of throwing out the law. Jesus literally says, throw the first stone. However, he handles that brilliantly with an all-important qualifier. We'll see that in a moment. But he finds a way to answer, even in this circumstance, in a way that does not diminish the law of God or excuse the commands of God and say, you can just cut them out. He does not. And that's consistent with what Jesus says. If you look at the great Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, let me read to you. I'm going to read to you some of the words of Jesus here. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Therefore," words of Jesus, Matthew chapter 5, "therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Jesus is crystal clear. He does not cut it out. Well, some would say then, well, but look, that's generally true. But you have to look at Jesus and himself and his words and what he emphasized. And people have made this argument. Jesus really doesn't speak that much about the controversial topic at issue here. He doesn't talk that much about sex. He talks more about self-righteous people. He talks more about all these other things. And he seems to have kind of generally cut it out of his ministry, so maybe we should too. And you may have heard something like that. Well, Jesus, though, he didn't really go there. I mean, he didn't talk down about it, but he didn't really go there. He was all about grace and forgiveness. Is that true? Well, it is true that Jesus had a lot to say about self-righteousness. He does right in the story. And it is true that he actually talks more about self-righteousness and greed than he does about sex. But just because Jesus didn't speak about it much, does not mean he didn't speak about it at all. And when he did, he was clear. Now, uncomfortably clear. I'm going to ask you to bear with me and just listen to Jesus, just to his words. And then we have to wrestle with what we're going to do with them. But just listen to his words. Jesus, is there such a thing as sexual sin? Jesus says yes. In Mark chapter 7 and Matthew 15, he says that out of the heart all kinds of evil comes. All kinds of evil comes. And he gives a list of the kinds of evil that comes out of the human heart. And I'm going to quote him. He says, out of the heart comes sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit. You notice right there in the list, alongside theft and murder and greed and malice and deceit, are two sexual sins. Sexual immorality and adultery. You know what adultery is? If you are married, you have one person that your body, your attention, your sexual, physical body is to be given to. One person, only one, your spouse. Anything else is sin. And the other sin, sexual sin that he notes is sexual immorality. That's a catch-all word. The word is, the Greek word is porneia. And there is, in my office, a big book called the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. There's a it's this massive work of like 6 or 7 volumes, all of which are exhaustive deep dives into all kinds of Greek words and what they actually mean. And one of them has an article in there on porneia, and it means any sex outside of the marriage covenant between a husband and a wife in marriage. So Jesus speaks explicitly. And when he does speak about sexual sin, he doesn't lower the bar, he raises it. You remember in the Sermon on the Mount, he speaks about adultery and says, you've heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. I say, don't lust. Don't lust. He doesn't lower the bar, he raises it. And this is how he even ends this encounter with this woman. He says at the end, go now and leave your life of sin. You need to turn away from that. And he does this not just because there are certain things that are wrong or because he's some kind of prude. He does this because he upholds God's design from the beginning. In Matthew chapter 19, Jesus says, quoting Genesis, haven't you heard that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. This is the good design of God. Now, listen, remember our question. What are we going to do with the commands of God? That's our question. Including his commands about sex. We might try to cut them out. But we can't do that and read through the Bible without practicing a kind of willful ignorance. Like just sticking our fingers in the ear and like, no, Jesus, don't talk about this, and then I'll listen again when you talk about other things that I like. If we do that, what we are saying is, Jesus, I'm smarter than you, I've figured out more than you, I know better what's good for my life. Augustine, a church father, 1,500 years ago, said this, if you believe what you like in the Gospels and reject what you don't like, it is not the gospel you believe, but yourself. You see what he's saying? If we come to the Bible with a razor, then we aren't trusting God, we're not trusting Jesus, we're trusting in ourselves, our sense of right and wrong. And Augustine says, just be honest then. Jesus is not your Lord. You're Lord telling Jesus what is right and wrong. You're not listening to him. Now, you may be here, or I'm very aware that this is being recorded and going online. And you may hear this and think, well, then hearing that, I don't want to follow Jesus. You may say, I've been interested in Jesus, but you've just shown me what Jesus said, and I'm less interested in him. If Jesus said those kinds of things about sex, then he can't be right and he can't be good. Look, more and more people are saying that today. But can I just plead with you for a moment? Standards of sexual morality in America have been changing for decades in the direction of greater and greater permissiveness with the motto, it's okay as long as nobody gets hurt. But can we honestly look at our culture and say nobody is getting hurt by our current sexual culture? Honestly? Sex trafficking, right now, 40 million people worldwide, $150 billion industry. There are increasing rates of sexually transmitted diseases. There are increased family instability and children in broken homes. More children than in decades born outside of wedlock in the United States of America. Porn use in America is a $12 billion industry with more traffic going to porn than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. There's the Me Too movement, in which we have heard again and again about people who claim moral high ground actually turning around, and I'm talking about inside the church and outside the church, to be abusing their sexual power. And there are all kinds of headlines like this. And so, friend, let me beg you and just say, isn't it worth coming to this Jesus and just saying, let me at least try to understand what you are saying about sex and why it might be good. And if you are willing to explore even that question, I will give you a book This time I have a book. It's called Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With? And I'll read it, and you can ask any question you want, and let's talk about it. Because it's worth exploring. Don't write him off automatically on this. Listen. Why not? What do you have to lose? So what are we going to do with the law? One approach is to cut it out. But you can't do that and keep the real Jesus. That's not good. That's a dangerous, even deadly approach to the law. So there's another way to handle it, which is vividly displayed here. And I want to tell you, this one is also deadly. If you don't cut it out, you can crush with the law. And that's what the religious leaders do. I hope you don't lose sight of the fact that the message in the Gospels, again and again, this is the shock of the Gospels that I think needs to be heard in our society as well. It is not just that the Gospels give us an approach to say, do not cut out the law, but the Gospels say that there is danger in trying to keep the law and trying to enforce the law that can be deadly. There is a self-righteousness that kills. You can cut it out and you can try to crush it. Look, the leaders came to Jesus. They don't want to cut it out. They want to crush with the law. They literally want to crush this woman with stones for breaking the law. And there's violence in the air here. They look at how little concern they have for this woman. And this is consistent with many other stories in the New Testament. You see it here. They drag her out in public. This is what it says. They dragged her out and made her stand before the group, it says in verse 3. That was totally unnecessary. They could have kept her somewhere, just brought the question to Jesus and said she's being held by officers. No, they humiliate her. They have so little concern for her and possibly trying to use this woman to put maximum pressure on Jesus, even though it humiliates her. Not only that, everybody who reads a story always has read it and said, now adultery takes two. Where's the man? The Old Testament law is clear when it comes to adultery. Both the man and the woman are both held responsible. But the religious people who supposedly care so much about the law can't be bothered with details. They grab the woman, they bring her in, they demonstrate their own callousness, perhaps even their own sexism. They do not care about her. In fact, they're the ones who are saying, we care about the law, and they don't. They don't. Not really. Because the text says they were using this question as a trap, verse 6, in order to have a basis for accusing him. Do you see? Their real reason for keeping and not cutting out the law is not to love and honor God. It's not to love and honor other people. They used the law so they could be built up, righteous Pharisees, and others would be crushed. And the tragic irony here is they come to the lawgiver himself. They stand before Jesus, God in the flesh, and the experts try to take God's own law and use it as a weapon to kill the Son of God. See, you can be in rebellion against God more than one way. On the one hand, by saying to God, I will pick and choose, I will run my own life, thank you very much. You don't tell me what to do when your will contradicts mine. But you can also be in rebellion against God by being very, very religious and keeping all the laws, and so in effect saying to God, I run my own life, thank you very much. I've kept all the laws, so I'm in control. You owe me heaven. You owe me a good life. I am not like those people over there. And in that, you are not loving God. You are not loving others. You are just as much in rebellion as the other. When that takes root in our hearts, we are both ways equally saying, drop dead God. And the Bible says, the New Testament says that legalistic impulse is violent. Now, what does that mean for the church? For Christians? I think it certainly means this. We need to be aware of how we handle all of these issues. We can't back away from what God has said or who Jesus is. What Jesus could we make up that's more compelling than this one? None. Why would we water any Jesus down or take the hard edges off of him when he challenges us? We had better not. I can't think of a Jesus better than this Jesus. And yet, we need to watch our hearts. Because if we see growing in us, in this issue or any other, a secret hunger for judgment, where we just want to see certain people called out, watch out. Watch out. That can be deadly. And do you see what Jesus does here with the teachers? It's fascinating what he does. They use this question, it says in verse 6, as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started writing on the ground in the dust. Aren't you curious what he was writing? All kinds of theories. No one knows. But think of high stakes moment. What do you believe in the law? The woman standing there, the crowds around, and Jesus gets down and begins to draw on the ground. And they keep pressing him. They won't let it go. And so he straightens up to say one thing to the teachers. One sentence. Let any one of you who is without sin throw the first stone. That's it. Then he bends down and starts writing in the dust again. It's brilliant. And I want to show you, do you see what Jesus is more even saying to these teachers at this moment? Jesus is not saying, see, nobody's perfect, drop your standards. Jesus is speaking to the religious people and saying, oh, you religious leaders, you think you take the law so seriously. You don't. You don't at all, because you're standing here acting as if you could keep it, but you can't. Jesus is saying, stop comparing yourself to this woman and compare yourself to God, and you'll find you have much more in common with her than you have with him. And the older ones get it first and walk away. Now, you can cut out the law or you can crush with the law. And there is one other thing that can happen with the law in terms of crushing. You can be crushed by the law even if you're not trying to crush other people. I should just mention that too. You know, when everybody else is gone, Jesus is alone with the woman. And so then he straightens up and he asks her, woman, where are they? And I should just say woman. When he says woman, that's in throughout the Gospel of John. The Greek word there is more like ma'am. It's a term of respect, just to be clear. Ma'am. He uses the same word to address his mother, to address Mary in the garden after the resurrection. Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? Now he stops now to talk to her. He's gotten involved. He didn't have to. You know, he could have not taken the bait. There were times when people tried to get Jesus into arguments and he didn't take the bait. He just said, no, I'm not going to play that game. He gets involved here. He stops her from being stoned. And then he turns to her and talks to her. Why? Because he cares for her. She has been saved from the immediate physical danger of being crushed with by the law with stones. But do you know this? When you know the sting and the shame of sin, you don't need anyone else to crush you. You can sink under the weight of it all alone. You can beat yourself up all day long. You can wear the weight of shame and condemnation everywhere you go, and you don't need anybody to point it out to you. You know. And that's where the woman is. And maybe that's where you are. And you know the crushing weight of fear and shame because you know right now you don't want anybody to drag your internet history out into the public or your relationship activity or your weekend activity or the thoughts you have in your head. And the commands of God are crushing you. So there's two ways. Listen, there are three ways. There are three ways to deal with the commands of God. Two of them were deadly. You can cut it out. It's deadly. You can crush with it. It's deadly. There's one other way, only one that leads to salvation. Don't cut out the law. Don't crush others with it. Let the law lead you to the Lord. Jesus lingers to have this final conversation. He says, woman, again like ma'am, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And there's no one there except for him and her. And she says to him, no one, sir. And I want you to picture it. Everyone else is gone. It's just Jesus and this woman. Just Jesus and this woman. Everyone else has walked away. They won't condemn her. Does she know? We know. We know, don't we? I don't know if she knows. Does she know there is only one who could, in all honesty, with perfect justice, condemn her? He's the same one that could condemn me. There's only one who kept that law. There's only one who could stand and say, you are wrong and I am not. Only one. And she's standing right in front of him. What is that one going to do? This is what he does. Then neither do I condemn you. This is the real Jesus, and there's no one like him. Sinless, uncompromising in his holiness, in his good and high desire for us, and yet gracious, not condemning, forgiving. We are about to come to the communion table. When you come to this table, it's his table you come to. It's this Lord who meets you here. Jesus, the sinless one, did not come throwing stones. If you kept a record of sins, O Lord, who could stand? Thank God Jesus didn't come doing that. He came not throwing stones. He came to be crushed himself in our place. The violence of the religious wasn't unleashed that day on that woman. It would be unleashed in just a matter of time on him. And he would take it. Why? So that Jesus the Christ could say to you and to me, I don't condemn you. If you will come to me, I will forgive you. I will welcome you. I love you. No matter what you have done. If you come to this Jesus today, that's what. Confess it to him. Don't hide it from him. Confess it to him. You come to this Jesus today. That is what he will say to you. He will not reject you. He died for you. And yet, because he loves us, he also won't leave any of us where we are. He has a good design for your life, for all parts of it, even the most intimate parts of it. So he says to the woman, go now and leave your life of sin. So we're going to come to the communion table. And I'm going to invite you to take some quiet time of prayer. I'm going to invite you to be honest before God as we come to prayer. Not just about this sin, about any sin. Bring it to him. Ask for his help, his strength. Confess it. Turn from it. And I'm going to invite you to do that because this is the important place to start, but I also want to say this. We need others to help us as well. That's what the body of Christ is. We don't meet to judge one another. We meet to help one another follow this Jesus. And so you can come talk to me. You can write to me. My email address is on the website. It will be kept private. If you know a Christian in your life and you're struggling with something, talk to them. Talk to them. Risk it, and let's help each other follow Jesus. Let's go to him now in prayer. Just a couple of moments of quiet prayer.